Riders, hope you guys are having a mighty fine day and keeping it WFO. I've got a interesting interview with a former factory star and Geico mechanic. His name is Keith Clickstein. He was also Jimmy Dakotas's during the privateer years and into his factory racing career. And we go over a lot of shit. We go over factory programs. We go over amateur bikes, pro bikes, privateer bikes. We go over salary. We go over budgets. We go over benefits. We go over bonuses. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you learned something.
What chance does a privateer have?
Welcome to Silver Crown.
What do you say to a factory ride?
Welcome back, riders. I've got a special guest. He's was a factory mechanic, and I figured, we'd pick his brain a little bit and see if there's anything that our fans, the general public, would potentially not really know about. And so, Keith, how you doing?
Good. How's it going?
It's going marvelous, right?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
I like the road bike in the back. Did you watch the tour?
No. I'm trying to get into more road biking. Just one of those things. If I can't get out on the mountain bike, then this is kind of like my base spin bike. So
yeah, road bike is really boring. It's like your lungs die out before. Actually, no, that's opposite. It's your legs die out. Where like on the mountain bike, your lungs die out before anything. Because all the incline and everything. Yeah, road bikes, you're just. I'm gonna go straight for a really, really long time.
Yeah, I mean the thing's pretty cool. It's on one of those the Wahoos, and I just use it to, like I said, get a base. So
Cool.
If I can't go during the day, then use that at night or in the morning.
Yep, it's good for your knees.
Oh
know.
yeah.
Yeah, that and swimming I've found in life after dirt bikes seems to help. But I'm digressing. I'm great about it. The reason why I had you on was just that you're a factory mechanic. So I wanted to dive in a little bit, ask you some questions about like what was your experience over at Star Yamaha, and what do you really consider a factory bike? Because I'm sure you gotta touch these suckers.
So working with Star was, is like a dream come true, I guess. I mean, you're working at factory Yamaha. Star took over the program. I got to work with Aaron Plessinger, who's world class, right? I mean, everybody loves him. Super easy to work with. Always positive. There's no bad days. And if he did have a bad day, he didn't carry it to the next one. And so with the team, everybody was really cool there. They kind of just stick to their own guns, what they believe in. And that carried from the 250 team, which was proven. And they just said, we're going to start here with what we know on the 250 and apply it to the 450. So it was a bit of a learning curve because between all the two of the three mechanics, no one really had any experience in the 450 programs. So we were kind of diving in and had to learn, going racing. And I think if the way the series was, it actually probably benefited us because we would make changes and just show up and race, right? Where for 2021, they would have 3 rounds right in a row. You'd have the 3, Dallas rounds and the 3 Houston, vice versa. So 3 Arlingtons. When you do stuff like that, where you just go racing on it, it kind of gives your answer right away. When you have the week-to-week program, you might show up on Monday and the riders are a little foggy and, hey, let's try this. And, oh, yeah, it's better. But nothing – I mean, there's some things that correlate to racing at the test tracks, but most of the time you learn all your answers on race day.
So most of the testing, the most important testing is racing, is what you're saying?
I mean, I think that's what kind of slingshotted the team into all of a sudden, we're getting some answers and we were – I mean, it wasn't until 7 or 8 races we were pretty competitive with Aaron. Dylan qualified. He got his first podium. I think it was round 2. The team wasn't bad with the first year go.
Yeah. How
And
long did he work with Star, and what was that timeline as far as
so I
like,
actually started with Star at the end of 2020, right when Geico kind of had its demise. So there was a few guys that I worked with over there. Alex Campbell, who is Dylan Ferrandis' mechanic. He kind of reached out and said, hey, we're going to be looking for a guy if you're interested. And so I had a few options, and I thought the best one was to go with Aaron and Star Racing. It's kind of worked out really good, and I think Aaron had a big jump of a season from previous seasons, and and like I said, Star is a good team. They're smart. They stick to their guns. They believe in what they have for a bike. They like to keep the riders in their window.
yeah.
And, if the rider is struggling and, they want to go down that path where the rider wants to test, they'll allow it. And, once that rider gets down there, and it's like sometimes it's a go and it's good, or they have to rail them back in and say, this is kind of why we have our package, because you went down this road and it's not working. They slingshot around, and they're back on their original bike, and the rider's like, yeah, this is much better. And it's like, this is what we started with, dude. And so it's one of those things, they're not afraid to, put the effort in, whereas some teams I feel like maybe, hey, this is our bike. Don't go outside this window.
Yeah,
Stars.
they might have somebody else kind of pulling the strings there, where they don't have the range to make so many different changes. Where I think that's one of the reasons why Star has gone from sort of a lower team to now the main team, is because they've innovated and then they've tried so many different things. And hey, this worked. Let's go on that path. And okay, drop that because that didn't work.
Right.
What made you leave Star?
So that's kind of, it was a weird deal with Aaron. I really liked working with Aaron, and at the time, as mechanics, you don't get these contracts that are 3 years or 4 years. It's kind of like year to year. And so with Aaron, I really want to continue working with him, and he was in that phase where he's interested in KTM, and they're showing some interest. And so is Star. And so the two were kind of, juggling Aaron, and I'm kind of sitting in the middle like, hey, I want to be loyal to you, and I want to kind of be loyal to Star as well. So where do we stand? And for a minute, it honestly led like it was going to be KTM. And so at some point, I was actually over there, trying to talk to someone like, hey, is there going to be an open spot? And, because with Aaron leaving Yamaha, there really wasn't a replacement rider at the time. And in this line of work, you got to cover your ass at all times. So you got to be 2 steps ahead of everybody else. And so with Aaron kind of getting that KTM deal, it was like, oh, well, he might now stay with Yamaha. And I'm like, geez, I'm in the middle. Like, I'm over here at KTM trying to get a job, and now Aaron might be staying with Yamaha. And so once he kind of came up with an answer, it literally was kind of almost too late. I didn't want to, wait last minute. Like I said, you got to cover your ground.
Yeah.
I have a family to support. So in that time, that Star, we knew that was going to be moving to Florida. So I was kind of weighing options there. Like, if Aaron did stay with Yamaha, I could, he could possibly help me get to Florida. It's a big move. It cost everybody money. Nobody came out of that ahead. And so with my wife and
so Star Yamaha wouldn't really like help you guys moving wise.
I'm sure they helped some of the guys, but for my situation, it was we got to regroup and get to Florida. And so it was like, I had to weigh in on my wife's job. Originally, her job started here in Massachusetts, and they transferred her to California. And if we were to move to Florida, she almost would lose her job. So that was kind of one of those things. if we were ever make our way back to Massachusetts, she's in ground zero again. So it's like, it wasn't just all about me. So it was one of those things I had to kind of make a decision on my own, and I don't regret it. It led me to working with Mike, and, but to answer it, it was KTM it was like they waited too long to give Aaron an answer, and I didn't want to wait till September to find out, hey, KTM's not going to hire you, or maybe they were. I wasn't going to take that gamble. Not at 35, not being in the industry for the last 12 years. If they don't know who I am and the success that I've had with riders, then, why wait up until the last month? I mean,
Keith, has that kind of been your background with moving around with different teams and just being in the sport where everything was kind of hectic and last minute, and it's hard to kind of find a job, especially as a mechanic?
No, well, so when I first started, I actually worked with Jimmy D, which is everybody's favorite. He was kind of, I feel like, what made, first off, number one, 125 is cool again. So two was like, he's the privateer that was the one that did it, right? He came from, we had nothing. There was no money, and we went out and raced against the factory teams, and he put in solid results. And within a year, he was getting called to go to Geico. So that kind of introduced me a little bit, because I didn't want to go in and step on anybody's toes. Jimmy was a fill-in rider at that time. So I just helped out as a, kind of a practice mechanic, and just, took care of Jimmy's personal stuff, made sure he was at all the races. And it slowly migrated back into the privateer thing for a couple years. And I stuck it out with him. I just felt like, as a mechanic, I had a couple options to find a ride on the team, and, mechanics are replaceable. Me and Jimmy come from same town. We're friends. It was like, I'm not going to just jump on a factory team. We've been riding this one out, let's do it to the point where we both go. And it wasn't until the end of 15 that Ziggy was like, hey, we got a spot for you guys. And Jimmy was signed, and then they were like, we'll lock in Keith. And so that's kind of how it started, getting on the Geico team. But from there, I had 5 years at Geico, and there was no issues. Jimmy, I tried to stick with him when he went to JGR. But then again, we both came to an agreement. It's like, you got to move across the country, kind of weighing those options, and they didn't have any answers. And so, I was like, hey, it's cool to stay with Geico, and he was happy, and we both left and split, but he had a job and I had a job. And believe it or not, the first race without the little guy, he gets his first podium. And I have like a collection of like 15 fourth places with him, but
that's like somebody having you've almost got the jar open, and then you give up, and the next guy's like,
yeah. So no, he, but Jimmy had a lot of success after that, and I did too. I went, my first race without Jimmy, I worked with RJ Hampshire, and he ended up winning the USGP at the Florida National there.
WW-ish.
Yeah.
And
and so that was really cool. That's what kicked off my next rider with RJ. And we did 2 years together, and he made his way to Rockstar Husqvarna. Again, it was one of those situations, I wanted to be loyal, and they just didn't have a spot. And it wasn't like I was ever trying to dump Geico. It was just more or less like, you work with these talented riders, and, the one piece of the puzzle, and I'm not trying to like toot my own horn, but you have to have a connection, and, you want the rider to trust you and be able to open up and like.
Yeah, you're like a therapist in a lot of ways. And
you're
controlling a motorcycle that's like, hey Keith,
Yeah.
is this thing gonna kill me? Like, and you're like, no, dude, this thing is golden. Just go WFO, and you're like, all right, thank you.
Right. You want to get the most out of your rider. And, I felt like every rider that I worked with, we had that connection. And at least I thought so. And RJ was very cool. And it just didn't work out again at Husky. And so it's just when you have that restart where you're going in with another rider, it's like you don't know, and you certainly don't want to clash with a rider. Thankfully, in my career, I've never had that experience, but it's just one of those things that, like, it works, right? And so you just want to continue going to work every day and being happy with the person that you're teamed up with.
Would you say that a lot of like a mechanic's success is kind of dictated by the rider's success? Like, you could be the best mechanic ever, but if your rider's just unlucky, there's going to be certain doors that are shut for you. Like it's like a rider. If you start winning races, like more doors open for you. As a mechanic, right, you could be in a weird analogy, like you could be winning as much on the motorcycle, having this epic, you're keeping it together, but right, if the rider's not doing well, is it kind of holding you back?
Right. And, there's times, there's guys that I've seen that had just come off a championship and then they go and work with another guy, and it's like, and they literally have said, this isn't fucking worth it. And it's like, you can't have that mindset. Like, it's out there. There are mechanics that do it, and you'll see the ones that are racing, and then when they all of a sudden they take a little break and then they come back into racing, and it's like, oh, they got the rider that they wanted. Right now the sport, I feel like, is flooded with these young kids, which is great. So they'll take anything, right? They're just so lucky to have to work on a factory team. But yeah, I think that, you kind of make your own luck too. The biggest thing is if you can work with a rider and get the most out of them. Nearly every one of those riders that I listed off, I've had Dakotas, Hampshire, Freezy. I had worked with Hunter Lawrence, Aaron Plessinger. Up until, working with them, they all had their best season, right? And yes, they may have went to another mechanic and maybe got better, but it wasn't that they came to me and had a decline in results. And so that was one thing that I could, kind of think about and say, we did make these guys better, and that's what's most important. Whether they were happy with all the results, no, but they did get better, and they did. None of them lost a ride. None of them, So it's one of those things. It's just, as long as I feel like you're improving the rider, that's most important. But
wording this the way I want to say it is your income dependent upon how well the rider is? Like, do you have a base salary usually, and then you have bonuses for?
Yep. So, most riders typically set like a 10%. All my riders. Geico was a little bit different, and I actually liked how Geico did it, where it was kind of like based on how everybody did. So, you had your salary, and then say you had 5 riders. Of those 5 riders, they all got podiums. Well, 10% of that roughly comes out of their bonuses, and 50% goes directly to the sole mechanic. So then the other 50% of those podiums gets divvied up between the engine builders, the other mechanics, suspension techs.
Okay, so you're collectively
everybody got
building
a little piece of the pie, and you built the team up. And then you have some mechanics, that are just like, oh, I want all the 10%. And it's like, man, the fucking guy just built your engines all week. Like, it's, some people kind of get a little greedy, I feel like.
Yeah,
but
without them, you wouldn't be doing it as well. Is that dictated by
There's no way
riders?
a single guy can keep up with the way it is now. It's just too much. So you need engine guys, you need suspension techs. And so I got 10% from Aaron this past year, but I divvied up my whole 50%, and I cut checks to all the other techs on the team.
So is that your decision, or is that
was my decision? Yeah. I chose to do that. I just thought that that's the best way to lift the team. I mean,
Yeah.
if you got a guy that's making all the money because his guy's winning, and then you have that day where you got to catch up and you got a late night and you got to grind till midnight or something. Me and the boys would stay back and do that because you knew that at some point it's going to pay off, and hopefully he would do that in return. And so, but the guys that didn't want to share their money, it's like, is
that mechanics or riders? You don't have to name any names, but is it?
Oh, no. So some mechanics were not happy with, they wanted all the money, and and then some riders, they didn't want to give all that money, 10%. They
Was
wanted to cut
10% kind of minimum, or could a rider
I think
say
it's like a base, like that's kind of the, I don't know, I guess
the standard, the unwritten rule
exactly.
kind of a thing?
Yeah.
But if you wanted to, somebody could give you 20% of their bonuses.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay. That's interesting that it's rider to rider. That's
and
hearing that.
I liked, like I said, I liked the one where everybody gets a piece, because the biggest thing of all, it's there's not one guy that does all the work. It's everybody, and sharing is caring, and it's like, you want everybody to work together, and so that's what's most important. That's what wins.
Yeah, like rising tides raises all boats kind of mentality, because,
Exactly.
Everyone thinks that this sport is, it's the rider. It's just Aaron Plessinger's out there. He's doing it, but he's got 50 people behind him, including a truck driver and all sorts of crap that are getting him there. So if he's the only guy happy and you got 49 other guys that are pissed, that's not a dynamic that's going to work a while. You could have some guy finishing 5th place, and if everybody is collectively, like, I think that's kind of maybe where Star did it right, where and Geico as well. That's why they were successful for as long as they were. I guess Star's kind of in their peak right now, but it's because they're kind of going against the grain a little bit, and trying to do things a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now that they just invested in the taking over the Carmichael farm, and that's a no-brainer. Obviously Baker's factory, but they don't have what Star has, where they can literally test every day.
Mm-hmm.
Baker's factory is something that, you got to send suspension, or you send an engine package and you wait 2 days, and then they get it and they try it, and then there's feedback, and it's like everything at Star right now is
in-house
and done that day, which is a huge advantage. You can sneak in just about, you can get a full day of testing if you're playing against weather. You're not worried about shipping. The costs that teams pay in shipping to have a rider on the East Coast and their base in the West Coast, their numbers are huge, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's like,
you mean motors and suspension and stuff are heavy?
Exactly. And most of the time is when you're shipping an engine, it's because if they should have one spare sitting there ready to go. But like, there's been times where it's, hey, there's, we're having a transmission issue. Like we just found, get some all fresh engines with this new transmission, boom. And you're just next day airing all these engines. And it's just so that way you keep the rider alive and not have that issue happen the next day while he's riding. So there's so many different factors that go into it.
Yeah, I didn't even think about how much money that teams spend in shipping, with
crazy.
Yeah.
So, and like the riders are very lucky when the teams say, yeah, you can stay and live and train in Colorado or Florida or wherever, it's like, yeah, you get your salary, but then the team has to kick in another, 30 or 40 grand in shipping just for that one rider.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Keith, what was the benefits in kind of pay for, a factory mechanic? Like, you can have a range here saying like, hey, you're a factory mechanic. I know this is dictated between, different teams, but like throughout your career, was your salary like no less than 40 grand, and then like your best year was six figures? Or if you don't mind kind of sharing a little bit about just salary, because we know that like the riders don't get paid a whole lot besides some of the elites, but it's interesting to kind of hear the dynamic behind.
So I think there's a little wave changes going around with the teams. I hear some of them are becoming like in regular employees instead of, like a 1099 contractor. So every team that I've worked for, you're a contractor, which is pretty much your own business. And I think there's benefits to that because
you could write everything
write-offs. Exactly, right? And so, you go to the track every day, and then, you got to go buy tools, anything like that. You're just say $60,000 salary, you're not paying much in taxes because you got all these write-offs. And the numbers do go up. I would say that a factory 450 rider or mechanic, he's, around the 75 to 100 grand. But when you're an employee,
but he's buying tools and things like that, paying for their gas.
Maybe, but I bet he doesn't buy as many because you're just buying to buy. Whereas some of these, when you're a contractor, you can buy these things and it's beneficial to you. Not only for the tools part aspect, but it does save money going, where nobody wants it to go. They want it back in their pockets. So
gotcha.
But as far as like KTM, they're employees. So, with this job it's not a 40-hour job by no means. This is a 60 to 80-hour job, if you're fully committed. And so, those guys, when you have the California law and they're working that many hours, their numbers probably jump way up. I don't know personally, but I'd imagine that, they're well over 100 grand, which is certainly acceptable. That's fair. That's absolutely.
Oh yeah.
I mean, anybody to do what they love and make over 100 grand. Yeah, there's a lot of sacrifice, but I don't know. I mean, and then you win a championship, and now you're in the 200s.
And who knows? I guess maybe I'm speculating a little bit here, but like you said earlier, as far as there's an influx of younger kids coming in, and it's kind of like the riders, there's so many privateers out there that just enjoy just being a part of the show. Therefore, they're okay with losing money because they just feel rewarded by how lucky they are for just being a part of the show. And I would assume some mechanics are like, okay, yeah, I'm 30 grand, but at least I'm here, living the dream kind of the deal.
Yeah. And I hope it's not like that. I mean, things change quick. Obviously, we just saw a skyrocket in inflation. So, I mean, I'm hoping that...
they said it was 8.5%.
Yeah. Well, hopefully these new mechanics are getting that. But, you just need enough to make a living. So, I mean, what's fair? I would say if you're an entry-level mechanic and you're starting on a team and they're not gonna put you on the line unless you've ran through 4 or 5 months of testing and the process, right? You're tearing down bikes and you're building them back up, and you're not having any trouble. So, but I think that's worth 55, 60 grand all day long. A base salary for a 250 mechanic. I mean, honestly, some of these kids come right out of school and get that, and that's great. I mean, also there are ones that get that and, they still need a few more years of learning the ropes, maybe working with a privateer. And, you see that, I don't know who's been out there that's tried to get a frozen bearing, a steering stem bearing off, or been through the gates of hell of, working on clapped out dirt bikes. But that's where I kind of learned, and I went to school a long time ago, but I had to work on privateer bikes with Jimmy, but then we were taking inside jobs just to kind of keep things afloat.
Yeah.
And you go through hell, and then working on a factory team is like cakewalk. You got every part, Everything's
Well,
new.
you've got all the specialized parts that make your life easy, as opposed
Yes,
to you
but
figured shit out to like, all right,
yeah,
I'm just gonna heat the fuck out of this and it's gonna
yeah,
pop out.
right. Yeah, you're not hooking up dynamite to your friggin', linkage rods to
Yeah.
blow the thing apart. But it's these kids, they're all going to be fine. I mean, nobody's out there letting them, screw up every weekend. They all get the proper training. Someone's looking after everyone, and so
But you make a good
factor.
point. Experience kind of outweighs maybe knowledge in a certain way, as far as like book smart versus just flat out
Be,
experience.
yes, going through and just grinding it out and understanding. I mean, how many of these kids even know how to jet a four-stroke car? It's
Mm-hmm. Wait,
I bet now,
it's
now
electronic
everything's
now.
fuel injection, so they're like a carb, what?
Yeah.
So these things are stuff that there's a win, like these young kids, they're not dealing with that, and try to get the bog out of this thing and what that was like. I mean, and I was kind of at the end of the carburetor and moving into the fuel injection. So, it's like looking back, I mean, even back then, those mechanics, most of those guys are gone. There's a few hanging around, but everything now is done computer. There's someone that walks over and plugs in their map, and hey, your bike's going to run perfect for the main event.
That's an interesting question. How do you feel mechanics wise are like the genre of a full blown motor mechanic is going to adapt to potentially the new influx of these like Stark bikes and these all just electric
Yeah,
type
I
bikes?
mean, really, then it's just going to be your chassis guys. So I don't know what they're going to be doing if we're going to have just these brainiacs in battery powered stuff. But I mean, hopefully it doesn't ever get to that point, because it will kill the sport. I mean, you'll eliminate all the engine guys, right? Where are they going to turn to? And then, mechanics, you're not doing oil, you're not doing air filters, you're doing tires, a chain, sprocket, some grips and graphics. Like, so you're not doing clutches, you're not, so all these jobs that you have right now, if they just go electric across the board, I bet that you cut that down to a quarter of the people,
Yeah, well, and there's a lot
You're going
of
to really need your suspension guy, and most teams don't even have a chassis guy, but call it a chassis guy.
yeah, well, and there's a lot of aftermarket companies that add hot cams, and they make special
Yeah, yeah,
pistons and
yeah,
rings and
yeah.
that
So
thing.
it'll wipe out the industry.
But you do have an extremely good point there. Like that can be catastrophic for the industry,
Yeah, right.
and me being selfish wise, like I don't have my mechanic anymore, and I was one of those like kids that I just ran the dog piss out at stuff, and then I paid for my dad to fix it, kind of a thing. And so I just take my bike to a shop if I need a top end or something, because I don't trust myself to put everything back in correctly, because if I'm going to go ride a bike comparable to how it should be ridden, that bike can hurt me a lot. So the transition between less moving parts kind of makes it to where like I might potentially ride more, because I'm not as scared that something is going to go wrong in the bike. Because you said it yourself, dude, you probably had sleepless nights at least once a week doing
Yeah, yeah.
stuff, because there's
Yep.
so much involved with keeping that motorcycle tip top shape to keep the rider safe.
Right. And now, what are they going to do? They're just going to call the battery guy and get the new one in, and there's probably some mapping. They're going to be changing power curves, and it'll totally get advanced. Beyond what we've ever seen right now.
And who knows, maybe that might be like the privateer class, or we'll say that that's like the E class. So you still have the
Yeah, just don't let it come in with the engines, because as soon as that happens, and if it does win and it does do better, then everybody's going to go that route. I mean, look what the 4-stroke did to the 2-stroke, right? And if the and that is killing the sport, right? Because how many people can afford a to rebuild the 4-stroke. You know, it's not easy.
Yeah, the two-stroke
So,
was like $700, and it was boom,
yeah,
brand new top end. Now you're
yeah,
like, oh, $4,200? Are you
yeah.
kidding
I
me?
mean,
Like,
how many kids have ridden a bike and found the crank come out of the skid plate? Like, what? You know, like that
yeah,
is crazy to me. That, I mean, yes, it happens all the time. It's whether the engine is, timed out, but that kind of explosion, that nobody can ever recover from that. Like, I mean, you got cases. It's a $5,000 rebuild. So you just spent 10 grand on a bike. You rode it for a season and a half, and then your crank come out of the skid plate, and now you got another 5 grand. And that
hmm
bike is never going to be the same, because there isn't a factory mechanic typically doing that engine. It's not to knock on the dealers, but those dealerships are not, those guys there are typically not capable of getting those engines back the way they should be, built properly, so it's,
Yeah, I've heard that too. It's hard to find a good mechanic that you trust because,
yeah,
again, like you could just, this isn't building Legos. There's a lot more involved than just putting the motor back together with this manual that you have
right,
here. And okay,
right.
so I've got a couple stupid questions here, okay, because I've heard a couple things. So the first question that I would say that's fairly ignorant is I've heard multiple things as far as it's better, like a bike, it actually creates more horsepower when it's a little bit broken in. Like if you just have a brand new top end bike, it's going to not sit as well as like a bike that might have 3 to 4 hours on it.
Oh yeah, I mean, seals kind of loosen up in bearings, so there's less, drag basically, and so yes, that is true. They do get a little bit faster.
Okay, so my next follow-up question to that is, like, factories, I know they change out tires right after one deal. They change out a brand new clutch after just one qualifying session. When is it that you guys rotate the top ends and the motors? Is it just like he finished one supercross race and then we'll rebuild the entire engine, and then from practice the next weekend it's a brand new 0 time on the motor, and then
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but not. So, we'll go with Geico, right? So when we would get our race bikes, we would build them and you take it to the track. So that race was Saturday. You'd show up on Monday or Tuesday with your race bike and you do a shakedown. So you'd run it for, the whole day of practice. And if the rider was happy, you go racing with that. If he was not and he wanted to ride a little bit more, you got 2 hours. Then he would go and race. Press day is typically Friday, so they get
free
another
practice.
30 minutes. And then you're making probably suspension adjustments, and they're going, what the hell, my bike doesn't feel right, and you just got to start all over again.
So, sorry, Keith, interrupting just a small little bit. So,
Yep.
press day was important for you guys to kind of break in the motor a little bit.
Yes. So you would typically have your break-in day, press day, and then you'd race. And typically those engines would all come apart after the race and inspections done. Basically, are they seeing anything wearing that shouldn't be wearing that way? And, but most of the time that race spec engine was already ran through the practice stuff, meaning that they're not going in with something that they haven't ran before. So it was just whether it was done on a new case, a totally new engine, instead of used cases in the practice bike.
So would you ever, how hard would you push a motor before it was completely rebuilt?
So every engine before it was handed back to the mechanic to install into the bike was always dynoed for 20 to 30 minutes. And it was power tested, make sure everything is Sano. So typically they would get 30 minutes on it before it would even come to the mechanic. And then we would take it, that rider would ride it. So usually the second or third one, engine, because most teams would have 3 engines. One in the bike, 2 spares, and then the rotation
for each rider?
For each rider, yes. And then the rotation begins. So round 2, you get engine 2. and then round 3, engine 3, and then round 4 is back to engine 1. And so it was always kind of in rotation like that, just to kind of keep things. You always had one spare in the locker. One was typically going to the next race. So when you had the engine 1 going to doing round 4, depending on where it was, it would come back, it would get rebuilt, and then they would send it to round 4.
So there'd be no more than maybe 8 to 12 hours on a motor before it was getting rebuilt.
There was, I would say be no more than 3.5,
Okay.
4 hours. And to say rebuilt, typically everything is just torn down, cleaned, inspected, throw a new set of rings on,
New piston, new
decarbonate
clutch.
head, and new clutch, and put it all back together. When you start saying, oh, it's all new every weekend, new cranks and new pistons, new valves, that's not true. That's,
Okay.
They are just servicing it, inspecting it, making sure there's...
Okay, well then when would you do the crank and the valves and gears?
That's on the engine guy, but, I would say that most times, like, the cranks were getting rebuilt or serviced every, 15 or 20 hours.
Did you guys tumble the gears at all? Like put special
Yep,
coating
yep.
on them so the riders
Yep.
could yank on them?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, anything that was ever ran on a race bike was always track tested, and put through a test, So Geico could give you an engine, and they said, give it back in 15 hours. And you'd hand it back, and they'd give you the next one for practice. Excuse me. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, practice engines would, every 15 hours, you're in rotation.
So they kept you busy is what they did.
Oh, yeah, yeah, And if there was an issue, boom, get that thing right apart and find out what caused that issue. And then the next move was, is there other engines that are going to do that, right? And get to the bottom of this before it happens again. And it's just at one point, and, this is no lie, Jimmy was a privateer and Kibby was the engine guy at Geico at the time. This was 2011. And Jimmy was on the team, but he had just gotten he's in that window of privateer and has a factory ride. Well, they gave him an engine to use while he was back here in New England. And we rode the piss out of it. And I'm talking the piss out of it. Jimmy put about 45, 50 hours on. I didn't check the valves. I just changed the oil, serviced the air filter. This thing was near bulletproof. And to this day, Jimmy still thinks, he's like, even at 50 hours, that thing was still one of the fastest bikes I've ever owned.
Dude,
And it was a Geico engine that, show me an engine guy right now that can build a engine that can last 50 hours with a pro level rider and still put out that kind of horsepower.
Yeah,
And so,
it doesn't happen. It doesn't
advantage.
happen.
Exactly. That's the advantage of these teams, is that they have the resources to make power and reliability and just keep elevating and elevating. And if something goes wrong, why? And then fix that problem. And then
I remember being an 18-year-old kid, and well, actually, okay, semantics here. I think I was 22, and it was like the first year that I was gonna try to do like 6 nationals that I could afford, and I put $6,000 into my motor, and I was racing locally, and that motor blew up in 6 hours, and so there went everything. And so I had this stock bike that had 100 hours on it, and it just was clapped out, and it took my boner of like, all right, I'm ready for the races, and it just deflated me completely. And I was going, man, I finally felt like I had, because I was 3 seconds a lap faster on that built motor, because it was my race bike, and it was supposed to last a lot longer. I was getting ready to just put a new top end in it about 10 hours, but the crank just went kabooey, and it was a Talon crank.
You're $6,000 into the performance, and then you're another $6,000 just to get it alive again.
No, and I was able to go to one national that year because I had to spend all the money to get the bike back going. And looking back on stuff, it's like, man, I should have just run stock stuff that was reliable and just gotten my ass to the races because that would have.
Right.
Yeah.
And, and it's out there. It's still happening. Which led me to how I even got this interview with you. Me and Mike have this shop together, and one of our riders, his name's James Harrington. James is a kid from New England. He's working with Jimmy Dakotas. Jimmy's just trying to help these riders locally, training and kind of have a proper routine when they get to the track and just help out, better all these guys. So James has had bad luck where he's had engine failures week after week, and it's like, what is going on? And he was spending a lot of money. And I ran into Jimmy at Southwick. This is like one of the first Southwicks I've ever been to that I wasn't working, right? And so I'm going through the pits. I have my nephew, and we're, saying hi to everybody, and it's all cool. And here comes Jimmy D running up to me, and he goes, "Oh, we need your help. We got to do an engine swap." And I'm like, and I'm in fucking casual clothes. Yeah. So I go over to this pit, and I don't even know James Harrington, and I'm looking, and it's a mess, right? There's 4 or 5 guys trying to get the practice engine out of someone else's bike and back into his race bike to make it for the second practice. And I'm like, this is nuts. But
yeah, within like 45 minutes of each other. Yeah,
exactly right. So we have 4 guys going, and like I'm kind of out of it. Like, I'm just coming in with regular clothes. I don't know this toolbox. There's just tools bouncing off. I'm like finding Allen keys and doing it with all the tools that like I'm just not used to. It was a cool experience because he was able to get into the next practice, and then he was able to race the LCQ. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. But
because he was on a stock bike on a sand track that just robs all your horsepower.
Yeah. And so with that being said, I told Jimmy, I said, you owe me, because I just helped save this kid, at least get back out to the next practice, but bring him to my shop on Monday and let's get this kid squared away, because what I just saw, it wasn't good. No privateer should ever have to go through what James was struggling with, where his engine rebuilds were not working. You can't show up and have your bike last a couple minutes. That's insane.
No, it's not good for here. Because
you
might hurt yourself too.
There's no money in this sport, and it's very hard to make money, and it certainly can take your money, and that's what was happening. And so we took over James's program from Southwick on, and he just did his first race this weekend at Unadilla, and with our engine and our chassis build, and he actually had his career best. Again, I'm not here to toot my horn. It's not about that.
No.
It's about that these riders are out there, and they're spending thousands and thousands of dollars, and they're not getting what they can get, and they just believe in these engine builders that, I can do 50 horsepower, and the thing doesn't last more than an hour and a half. And it's like, that's not right. You don't need to do that for this kid. This job isn't going to make your rider get on the podium.
And even if you have a bike that does 60, 70 horsepower, is it rideable?
Exactly,
the thing.
Right. So let's take a step back, and let's make something affordable, reliable, and let the kid get to the races. You would have way better results had he just been able to race, but he didn't even really get to. And
less stress with all that going on.
It's insane. And how, I don't know how many times you see it every weekend, but these kids are pushing their bikes off the track, and it's sad.
Dude, there was like a couple mud races that I was out, and it was like, okay, I paid my entry fee, but there's no way in hell I'm going out there on the track, because
you can't afford it.
The bike's going to blow on me,
Yeah.
and I can't afford to fix this. So we just spent all this money traveling to get here, and then I'm not even going to try because I know that it's going to end badly. I'm going to have a paperweight at the end of it, which is just sad. As one thing, as far as being a factory mechanic, Keith, is, like as a as a privateer mechanic, you're the suspension guy, you're the motor guy, you're the chassis guy, you're everything. Once you got on that factory level, like when Jimmy or somebody or Aaron wanted something changed, were you the guy that just did the little clicks? And if it was something serious, then
at times, sometimes I would, because you spend every day with them, right? So when you kind of have to remember what they're talking about, as far as they might have that same feeling at the practice track as they do at the racetrack. And so, when that kind of issue comes up, you can easily correct it, right? And you want to be able to relate with what they're saying. So sometimes I may have not been the guy, where come back after the practice and you unwind and you talk to the team. There's a circle of the team manager, the engine guy, the suspension guy, and we kind of just evaluate how the practice went, what he was feeling. And if just say AP was explaining something, I could, basically get more out of him in correlation to how he was in the track. Was he on the brakes or off the brakes? Kind of, is it initiating the turn? And so sometimes I was the guy doing the clickers, and sometimes I wasn't. I would rather
relay that information to the
information, right? Get the most out of the rider, pick his brain a little bit more, and there's been changes that I'm like, God, this is not the way I want to go. And we've done things and we've gone the opposite way. And the rider comes back, he goes, that was way better.
So as opposed to like, I was never privy enough to have that many guys around me. So, let's just use AP as an example. He's using you as a confidant to say, hey, the bike, it's just the ass end is just all over the place. And then you're like, all right, Aaron, I'm going to go figure this out for you. So then you talk to the suspension guy and everything. And he's like, hey, we're going to make it faster. Okay. And we're going to change the shock out. And then you and him kind of go do that. And then you relay the information kind of back to Aaron that, hey, bike is good. This is what we did. Boom.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And even like during practice, sometimes Aaron's biggest thing is he would always feel like, the ass end is too high. It's not squatting. It's always too much forward. And he's going to go over the bars. And so at times, a quick adjustment on that was just be like taking a little preload off the shock spring. And, that's something that, you hear on the radio, hey, do this, do that, blah, blah, blah. And you make a quick change, but you don't have much time in these practices especially in openers.
Yeah. They're qualifying. Yeah.
So it's like you're doing minute adjustments, and
again, that's why press day is so important.
Exactly. You're just looking for a little bit more comfort. And sometimes you hit a home run, or sometimes he comes back right back in. He's like, no, you went the wrong way. And it happens. And it's like, but I think the biggest thing of all is just controlling the rider. If their biggest thing is they freak out, right? Like now they're riding and they have all this emotion, right? They can't even think of what they're doing. They're just thinking about their bike. And it's like, you need to control yourself. The bike is the bike, and we can worry about that after. But right now you just need to focus on hitting your marks and getting around the track. And so that was another kind of obstacle with these riders is, we'll fix it. We'll get the answer that we need, but you need to go do your job right now. And this is what these are the cards you're dealt with. And in 10 minutes, we'll be back in the pits and we can sort it out. But right now you need to put in a qualifying time. Otherwise we're not going to make it. It's like, and obviously they were plenty fast enough that they were shoe-ins, but it's just one of those things that you could ruin you could ruin a practice if they just spent their whole time worrying about, what they're feeling. And it's literally could be whether they woke up on the right side of the bed or the left sometimes.
Yeah. We've all been there. All right.
Yeah.
Back to some of those stupid questions that I was telling you about. So you've had your hand on a lot of factory bikes. Okay. What would you say is the biggest difference between a factory bike and, like, let's say a privateer bike? Would you say it's the electronics, like the ECU, or would you say it's the motor, or it's kind of a candid question there, but
Well, so I don't think it's. I think it's the R&D. Okay, and the reason I say that is, you get these privateers and they go and say, "All right, I want this guy to do my suspension," and he gets his Supercross suspension, and he goes and takes it to the track, and there he's ready to go. He's going racing. You know how many times a fork and shock come off a Star bike or a Geico Honda bike before they go racing? It's like 20 to 30 times a day that they can come off and change the settings. So the advantage is that rider that's on the factory bike has pinpointed or getting exactly what he wants, and so he's riding a bike tailored to him. He's got handlebar options. He's got foot peg options. He's got shifter lengths, brake lengths. He's got seat heights. He's got subframe heights. He's got everything. He's got different races. He's got different wheelbases. I mean, different linkages, different clamps and offsets. So all those little factors is what makes a factory bike. And it's the time and going through each one of those parts and making sure, did you like that? Yes. Where was it better? Here. Okay. Put in the lap time. All of a sudden he clicks off and he's a half a second faster. All right. Now you can do bigger stuff, you can do engine hangers or tie bolts, right? And so these privateers, they go and they call their engine guy and say, yeah, man, I need an engine, make it fast. And they get their engine back, and then they get the suspension back from whoever, and then they build their bike, and then they go and race it. And the thing could be so far off, and they don't know. They just assume that they're within range, Supercross is so dangerous, number one. And if you don't have, that's when you show up to the races and you see, look at the factory bikes and how good they get through the whoops and how fast they are. Or
they look like they could have died like 12 times on the track,
somebody,
and they survive a lap. And then you watch like the privateers go through it, and one small little mishap, and it looks scary.
Right, and it's not whether the privateers have it or not. Every single rider out there has it. There's something in them that makes them that talented, that fearless. It's a lot of it is the bike setup. If you don't track test and you don't spend 40 hours a week for 3 months, 4 months leading up and dialing in your bike, you have no chance. I mean, they're basically putting a bike together and they test it on that Tuesday before, and they go, yeah, this is it. This is my race bike. You got to spend hours and hours suspension testing and engine testing and chassis testing. And a lot of those guys, they don't have access to that. And it's unfortunate. So that's what makes it, that's the biggest thing that I feel is what's unfair is they don't have that ability.
Third stupid question here. Again, you don't have to answer this, but that term factory parts, what does that speak to you? Is there something where potentially, like let's say you get from, Yamaha factory, and genuine Yamaha parts, their whole GYTR stuff, and they only have a couple of them. Do all the bikes get it, or do sometimes you only get certain stuff that might potentially go on to...
Yeah, so any factory part, I mean, depending on what it is, if it can cause a big amount of damage, if it were to break or something, obviously it needs to be track tested. But when you get like a factory skid plate, I mean, you put it on, the bolt holes line up, that's cool, whatever. But yeah, if you're getting like, just for example, we have the Yamaha, they had factory axle blocks, very cool. It's very precise. It's a little bit lighter than, your stock one. It's tailored to the axles, and it's just a more precise fitment. Those were track tested. So
if I'm reading in between the lines, you're saying that there is some parts out there that are just manufactured that are specific for these bikes that
Yes.
over the group of them could potentially make a big performance boost, but it's not like, a one bolt on, boom, this is the thing that's going to make the difference.
Right. Like, Geico had the Works factory hubs, which were much stronger than stock. Supposedly, I've never seen it, but Honda had some issues with the OEM hubs, but you never saw, Geico never would run an OEM hub, maybe because of that issue. I don't know. But it was, just a cool part, but everything is always track tested no matter what. I mean, unless it's just something.
Did you ever run into like the promoters Feld or like MX Sports weighing the bikes or, taking them apart for saying like potentially this might not.
There was a couple races that they did bore and stroke, and I mean, you can those guys, they try to keep it tailored, but the system that they're using and how they're checking it, well, I'll tell you this story. There was a fuel test, and the fuel test was one of the most embarrassing, secondhand embarrassment. And we all remember at Vegas. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not Vegas. Salt Lake City. It was a fuel test. AMA Star protested Chase Sexton after winning the championship about fuel, right? And so we had to pull fuel out of Chase's bike after that championship. And you saw how it was poured out of a gas tank and into these tiny little jars, and the mess that it made. I'm like, what is this? This is so unprofessional. And that's our testing, right? Like, to say that, where's your, I guess you could call it something similar to like a turkey baster, right? And you syringe the fuel out and you dump it in. Instead, they got this fuel tank and they're pouring gas everywhere. And I'm like, into these little vials, and I'm like, this is a shit show, all while we're trying to celebrate a championship that really we knew wasn't going to get overturned. And so we missed the celebration. AMA is trying to do this, and it's like it's a total joke, to be honest. I mean, the level of professionalism that the promoters and, AMA, I mean, those are all good guys and they're trying, but like, we got $1 million sport, like, and you have these issues like that where you're fuel testing, right? Or it's just crazy to me. I mean, there was a rider this weekend, right? He qualified, and then they pulled his time because they said that they mixed up the times. How does it, and so he didn't qualify. And then they're like, oh, you were fast enough, but you still have to go to the LCQ. And I don't know, I'll get the names for you so you can look into it.
Okay, yeah, because
there was
a
rider that qualified in time. He was like 31st, but they mixed up a bunch of riders' times, and they put him in the LCQ and said he didn't make it. And it's like, these guys spend.
Did he make the top 4 in the LCQ? So he was.
No, he actually didn't. I think he got into a crash. He didn't even make the show, but he did qualify by time. And it was there was a bunch of mistakes, and it's like, I don't know. I mean,
Keith,
you don't see this kind of stuff at NFL games or NHL.
No. That's a good segue to what the kind of amateur fiasco it happened at Loretta with the claiming of the bike.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that. I kind of read into it a little bit, and I laughed, like, I mean, I can tell you right now that everybody's saying that that's a factory bike. That is not a factory bike. They would never give him a factory bike, because if they did, what does he have to look forward to? He's going pro in a year and a half. So he's still on the same bike in a year and a half? That they don't do that, and I'm sure it was one of their better amateur bikes, but I would be willing to bet that was not the full same bike that Justin Cooper's on right now.
Yeah. That there is a good argument, there. My point is do you think that we're not pointing fingers at Star, we're not pointing fingers at HRC, we're kind of collectively, is it something that potentially you think even the amateur teams have a lot of resources to where these bikes are more expensive than, you get a really good deal on a bike for 17 grand kind of a thing if you were to buy one of those amateur bikes?
Yeah. So if you bought one from the team, I mean, no question. Yeah, I guess it's a really good deal, right? I mean, they're not going to put their rider out there on anything that's not competitive. But I think that they are pretty reserved. I mean, you're not going to you spend all this money on these amateurs, right? Some of them don't even get a pro contract, right? So why would they give them, what it costs to run a pro bike versus a amateur bike? It's night and day. I mean, just the bolt kit alone is $6,000 a year. So, or $6,000 a bike, I'm sorry. So, you're going to give an amateur, he needs 2 or 3 bikes, just to have for practice, in his one race bike. Do you think they're going to spend that kind of money giving him tie bolts? Or a kit suspension? They don't have enough of that for the pros, never mind, to do it for the amateurs. But it is a good deal. But at the same time, I mean, you got some of these amateurs with rich parents that they go and spend 25, 30K on a bike build, and their son gets beat. So what?
I'm not harping too much on the deal because it's been beat to death. When it comes to some of the amateur teams, I guess we'll just finish this. And you're talking about the as far as how much testing goes involved with making those bikes so precise. With the amateur bikes, is it a little bit more of, hey, here's just a stock bike with our set stuff. This is the amateur bike.
Exactly.
There's not that much testing involved in them.
Right. They get their attention when they need it, I mean, but they're not dialing them in like they are if they're spending time like Eli Tomac and, Dylan Ferrandis. They're not. I mean, but if the amateur rider is, feeling something, they'll give them a shock and, hey, try this out. But that's nothing more than what's not already available. It's just the Star or Geico or the Honda, these teams, they're just available there, right?
Yeah, they just have more resources per se.
Exactly, they have more resources, but you get your whole team behind you. But these amateur kids, like I go back to that whole proper, developing of the bike. Where is your testing? Where, they show up and they race the fastest bike they can build, but it's not all about the fastest bike. It's put your hours in, develop a bike that suits you. If you're a rever, well, then you need to sort that out, right? And it's like, or you like your suspension stiff, but when you go, that kid that protested or whatever they did, trying to get his bike, claim his bike, he could get on Deegan's bike and go, this thing sucks. Just because Deegan won on it doesn't mean it's perfect for you. Doesn't mean it's the best bike.
Yeah, it's suited for you.
Put your time, effort into developing something for that rider.
The accusations that were allegedly happened with that deal is they didn't want to let the bike go. The guys from Yamaha said that they had tech in the bike that they didn't want to let go. So therefore they made another deal with potentially giving a couple motors and maybe be able to ride the bike later on if they were to drop the thing. So that right there just makes it a little bit convoluted because it's going, why not just give up the bike if it's the bike that is so kind of worth the 18 grand that you're going to pay for it. And, we've got them in the shop kind of a thing.
Right. And, that could be true where they do have something in it, because I've seen before where, there's a new head package or a new piston that's come out. And sometimes, you got these pro riders, right? They're hired to win championships, right? And you got the amateurs. The pro riders sometimes don't need to be testing this new connecting rod or new piston on a supercross track, right? So, hey, they give that spec to the amateur rider. Let that amateur go ride outdoors and put 20 hours on it, and then let's take it back. So I'm not saying this is true. This is just me thinking in my head of what I've seen
Spitballing,
before, is maybe they did have some test parts on Deegan's bike. He is their hardest amateur rider, right? They're the fastest, so he's probably hardest on the bike, and they have something that they're in the works for next year. Like, hey, let's put some time on these cranks, and it's working right now. Let's race test it. What do we got to lose, right? And who would have thought that they were going to get, that whole rule, and so that could be them covering their ass. But I mean, it is what it is. I still, like I said before,
it's good for the sport. Drama's good for the sport. Whether we like it or not, it's good for the sport.
I don't know when the last time someone did that was.
Yeah, which is also brings up, like I heard JT on the Pulp Show talk about that it's an unspoken rule that you don't do something like that because you're going to be kind of the repercussions within the sport itself, that people are going to kind of blackball you. That's why you don't do it. And that to me isn't a good enough reason to not do something. But I mean, again, there's all sorts of different accusations with that. We can stop with there because my belief, granted I'm full of, shits and giggles with everything, that if one person is going to do it, multiple people are going to do it. That's just, so there is real no blame on Star versus HRC versus blah, 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 blah. I think it's more of a collective. As soon as somebody finds out the hidden way of doing something, boom, then everybody starts kind of doing the same thing. But I know, Keith, I've taken a little over an hour of your time. Was there any ending?
This was great.
Good. I hope we continue a friendship, and maybe I can use you as a resource every now and again if I have some just gnarly questions that probably need to be answered privately rather than starting more shit on something.
Cool. Yeah.
But is there anything that you potentially want to promote and kind of give traffic to, say thanks to?
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, thanks to Mike Grundle right now, we just opened up the Factory Moto Lab up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. If you are in the area and you need help, come see us. We will get you back on track. Race preps, service work. We're even doing restoration work for Mike's collection, and we're taking on other jobs like that. We're new to this. It's a kind of humble situation where you're back in working on these bikes that nothing's perfect again, so you kind of it's hard work, but I enjoy making these riders better and giving them a fair chance. So yes, we're going to be trying to blow up in the next few years, get bigger and give more back to the industry, and the guys that need help, come see us. We can get you figured out. And
you have a website and everything, Keith?
What's that?
You have a website and everything?
No, we're just opening up, so that'll all be in the works in the future. But
okay, cool.
I just have a Instagram. It's at _ Factory Moto Lab _ and you can visit that. And we just worked with Cooper Webb. They did that Zaffle thing with his Mike's son Eric, so we brought in Cooper. Cooper's a good friend of mine, and we got a bike for him, and we did some track testing. He went and raced a local J-Day event, and he won a few motos, which was really cool. And it's just kind of like basically the startup of our shop, and with Eric's new business, Zaffle, you can go and now buy a raffle ticket and potentially win that bike.
Sweet. Well, I know that experience is best when it's not your own. And what I mean by that is if you're looking at how to, get a good bike put together or something, you go from somebody that has had the experience. Therefore, you're not the one making all the mistakes. It's that whole thing. Why try to make a light bulb 1,000 times when there's already been a dude around that knows how to do it? So just go to him. So it'll save you a bunch of time. And I believe that's what they're going to do when they hit you up for motor work and restoration.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah. So. Well, cool.
Awesome. Well,
right.
do you want to brop with me? I know it's kind of the thing.
What's that?
Do you want to brop with me? It's the thing. It's
Brop?
the thing. Yep. We got to do it at the end of the channel. You just drop the hammer, you dump the clutch, and you just let it
You
WFO.
just gotta say, brah.
Yeah, bro. You don't want to do it, Keith? Bro.
My wife's in the kitchen going, "What the fuck is?"
You're a champ, dude. You're a champ.